welcome back to my channel. I'm going to move on now to another book that I want to review. Thank you for your comments for the last video, and sorry if I didn't manage to get through like literally all of them. I have read every single one of them though. But yeah, I just wanted to move on now to the next book review, which is, I'm going to be reviewing this book here called Nostalgia, A History of a Dangerous Emotion, which I read recently. I really like the cover. The reason and this book is by Agnes Arnold Forster, and it's a recent book. It only came out, I think, this year, I think, or last year? Very recent, anyway. And the reason I got this book is because I am very interested in nostalgia, in the phenomenon of nostalgia. I think because I consider myself to be a very nostalgic person. By that I mean I spend a lot of time in the past. In my head, I spend a lot of time in the past, going over memories, mainly from childhood. And I've got a very visual, long-term memory, so I can remember scenes from my childhood very, very well. And I think maybe part of the reason why I'm so nostalgic is because, quite frankly, my life was better back then, relative to now. Because when I was a child, I had not yet developed severe OCD. I had OCD tendencies from a very young age, but I hadn't yet developed severe OCD. It hadn't yet become a full, like, what it is now, like where my life is like really, really, really constrained and limited by all of my OCDs. I guess as a child it was more like just uncomplicated autism with some learning difficulties, but I hadn't yet developed all this additional kind of baggage of extreme anxiety and OCD, which now dominates my life. And so yeah, so I look back on that time, you know, longingly, I guess, because it was, quite frankly, better than it is now. Now, I know, like, people often say nostalgia is rose-tinted, and yes, that is true. Like, obviously, there were times in my childhood which were not good, and which I don't want to remember, which, you know, yeah, aren't nice memories, and obviously I wouldn't want to go back to those times. So yes, I am aware of the selective nature of memory, but nevertheless, I think it is accurate to say that life was better back then. It's not so much that I miss my childhood. I mean, obviously, it just so happened I was a child when my life was better. It's more just the fact that I miss freedom. I miss not having all this fear, not having all this OCD, which has basically taken over my life. So that's why I think I'm a very nostalgic person. And I think my nostalgia properly developed like in my teenage years, like from sort of like mid-teens, because that's when the OCD started to increasingly limit my life, and I started to look back increasingly at my younger years, and I've just got more and more nostalgic from then onwards, really. So yeah, so just interested in the phenomenon of nostalgia. There aren't many books written about it, so when I saw this book, I just thought, that sounds interesting. So that's what I want to review. So, nostalgia. So I'm just going to go through the main points in the book. Do let me know any of your comments, and again I'll try and do some comments videos at the end of this review. Let me know if any of you are very nostalgic or have nostalgic tendencies as well. So what is nostalgia then, first of all? Well, nostalgia is described as a past-oriented cognition. Past-oriented cognition, but it's bittersweet. It's a bittersweet feeling. The joy of reminiscence is also jumbled up with a sense of loss. Nostalgia can also be described as sentimental yearning. It's a highly emotional state because we look back on moments in time that we invest with meaning. So it's laden with emotion. There are different types of nostalgia, of course. There's personal nostalgia for things experienced, like your own personal, very private recollections. But there's also nostalgia for a time before we were actually born, that some people have. So it is actually possible, say, for someone to be nostalgic, I don't know, for the 1960s, even though they never experienced the 1960s. Someone could potentially be very nostalgic for that decade and enjoy listening to the music from the 1960s, looking at images from the 1960s. Some people even recreate their lives as if they were living in the 1960s, such as their nostalgia for that decade, even if they'd never experienced it. And of course, it could be any decade in time, not just the 1960s. I just plucked it out at random. So nostalgia can be personal or collective. Collective nostalgia is shared experiences that are written about, say, in the press, for example, or in the media. But nostalgia, as we describe it nowadays, is very different to how nostalgia was first described. Because at one point in time, nostalgia was described as a sickness, as a medical affliction. It was first talked about in 17th century Switzerland, which is where the whole idea of nostalgia really first took off. It was described as bodily and fatal. The actual term nostalgia was coined in the 17th century, in 1688, by the Swiss physician Johannes Hofer, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. And it literally comes from the Greek word nostos, homecoming, and algos, meaning pain. So in a way, it was first understood to be a type of homesickness, really, kind of very much along the same spectrum as homesickness, a very specific type of homesickness. It's quite different to how we think about nostalgia today. And it was seen as a disorder that afflicted European mercenary soldiers fighting far from home. And a Swiss milking song, and I'm not going to be able to pronounce this properly because I don't speak Swiss, so I'm not sure how you pronounce this, so bear with me, I'm probably pronouncing it completely wrong, but a Swiss milking song called Kues Rayen, Khue, I don't know how you pronounce it, Khue Reyen. Anyway, it's a Swiss milking song, was seen to be a particular trigger. And the social condition of nostalgia reflected the anxieties of the age. For example, particularly in 19th century France, where there was radical change. Canals, railways, peasants travelling to big cities for work. People felt adrift, they felt disconnected from their past. And in that you saw an increase in this phenomenon that was increasingly being talked about and medicalised, called nostalgia. It's very much a product of its time. It shows how disorders that are diagnosed and medicalised can be very much a product of their time. But again, during the 19th century, there's a transformation of nostalgia from disease to an emotion, and from something associated with a place, as in being far from home and missing your homeland, to feeling connected to time. So taking on more of the kind of connotations of nostalgia that we have today, where it's more associated with time, specifically past cognition. So in the 1680s, nostalgia was seen as similar to homesickness, and this changed at the end of the 19th century, and it was no longer seen as a medical affliction, but more as an emotion, closer to how we see it today. And then by the 1970s, nostalgia had almost become a fad. It was no longer seen as a threat to the body and mind. Nostalgia was even seen as something positive now, that it can prompt people to remake their surroundings even, For example, having 1970s wallpaper in your house. Okay, I'm going to move over to video number 2 now to carry on looking at this book called A History of a Dangerous Emotion, Nostalgia by Agnes Arnold Forster. So moving over to video number 2 now.